Hey Jamila, hope you're doing well. Overall, this week went really well in my opinion. I just wanted to touch upon a couple of things. Let me just give me 1 second and just pull up your feedback notes here. All right, cool. So first and foremost, the 120 by 4 looks super clean. I don't think that we saw as many issues as we saw with like higher intensity lifts, especially on the bench press, like we talked about over the weekend when we last saw each other, regarding mainly just the downward movement and the non-committal to the backwards bar path. I think that generally that 120 by 4 actually encompassed a lot of the things that we touched upon over the weekend where we worked together on your bench press. And I think that the focus primarily should be continuously on bar path and also making sure that your pauses are confident, not in a length type of perspective, but more in a per rep steadiness type of perspective. And what I mean by that is sometimes, especially in your first rep on that 120 by 4, sometimes the pause can be long, but it's not necessarily settled. And so when you come on down, there is some slight like reverberation happening on the bar where it's kind of tipsy-turvy. And a lot of times a ref will identify that as I need to continue making that athlete hold on to the weight until they stabilize the bar. So for the next 5 weeks of training that we have left, let's really try to focus heavily on touching a little bit deeper into your chest to the point where the bar stays extremely stable. Don't get me wrong, you have done a much better job at doing this over time, and we are seeing the unstable bar be less and less of an issue, but just try to really hyper-focus on that as we descend in reps and increase the intensity, only because we're going to probably be seeing a lot more of that earlier on, and we should try our best to cull that as much as we can. Next thing, I included the Instagram link there for squats. Now, I don't think I saw this in person. I think that the depth consistency was a little off. I think that while every single rep was certainly below parallel, it was almost perfectly below parallel. And what I mean by that is that sometimes refs, I'm a little biased as your coach because I get to see you squat literally every single week. And so I know that you have done a better job improving your depth, improving your descent, improving your squat form. Unfortunately, a ref is not going to understand any of that context, and they're going to make a very snap-second decision, especially amongst the fray of like spotters trying to like maneuver around your bar path. So I would like you to have your depth be more of the perspective of that fourth and last rep, because that was well below parallel. I don't think that any ref is going to red light you for that. And I also just want to talk a little bit about why that last rep might have been the easiest rep in terms of at least bar path and speed, and that is the following. When you come down right at parallel, like if you try to like stand like right at parallel in an air squat, a lot of times what's going to end up happening is that you will feel a lot of pressure build up in your knees. So essentially when someone comes down right at parallel in their squat, a lot of the pressure is being put on their joints and not necessarily on their muscles. So the best thing about the low bar back squat, or at least one of the best things about the low bar back squat, is that it almost entirely depends on something called the stretch reflex. This might be a little bit boring, but it's important to talk about because as you descend into your squat, your upright position goes from this to this. That's good. I'm not saying that's wrong, but because your hips are primarily shooting back and your knees are primarily shooting forward, what's happening is that your hamstrings are lengthening. Now, that lengthening process does store an immense amount of energy. Your eccentric, and I know that I've said this to you at least once throughout us getting to know each other, but the eccentric is the most powerful or exhausting part of a muscle action. So when you lengthen the hamstring, it actually increases tensile positioning. And then once you get to the point where you're below parallel, you're able to use that energy to bounce out and carry you through outside of the bottom of the hole. If you stop right at parallel, you unfortunately don't get any kind of bounce reflex. What is actually happening when you stop at parallel or right below parallel is that it's kind of like that of turning a boat around instead of turning a car around. So notice that if you turn a boat around, it has to go through this whole administrative process of like stopping, turning and then going in that direction, while like a sports car, for example, can just literally turn at its own will. And that will be the difference between 1 inch of below parallel or half an inch of below parallel. So hopefully that wasn't too boring of a discussion, but I just do think that you not only will be stronger if you go below parallel by using more of your hamstrings and more of a natural bounce, but I do think that it's important to start to hone in on making sure that depth is there on every rep, on every working set, just to make sure that when we work up to New York State's, refs aren't unforgiving, because we always want to assume that the refs will be more unforgiving than not. And while most of the time that's not the case, and most of the time we're pleasantly surprised, it's one of those things where we want to prepare for the worst and, win with the best. So going up to your next thing. So this might not necessarily matter as much, just because like your last movement that you filmed of the same situation was actually exponentially better. However, I think it's worth noting that like as your coach with your deadlift positioning, I think what's happening a lot of times is that you set your hips and you set your shoulder blades, but you don't necessarily set your thoracic spine. Your thoracic spine is basically the upper half of your spine, while your lumbar spine is the second lower half. And I think what happens, let's see if you can kind of see me here. I think what happens a lot of times is that when you're setting up, you'll like grab onto the bar like so, right? Your hips are set. I don't know if you can see me here, but I decided to wear all black while filming the video, but your hips are set, your shoulders are set like this, but your back is still rounded. So you might not necessarily be able to tell that your back is rounded because you feel so tight, and then once you start generating force, you start rounding your back, and that kind of allows for the bar to be broken off the floor really easy, so it kind of is a affirmation cycle. So like you set up, you feel tight, you seem like you're in the best position possible because you're not seeing yourself, and then you're seeing that the weight is flying off the floor, and you don't really realize that that is a poor position until you get to a weight where you have to literally uncoil yourself to lock out, and making that lockout significantly harder for you to do. And you won't feel that until you get to like your top set or anything like that. So I don't blame you for that bottom position, just because there's a lot of positive affirmation that comes from the idea that you can break the bar off the floor fast. You feel like you're staying tight, but then when you review the video, you're disappointed in your upper back positioning. So I think the best approach could be the following. So when you get into that bottom position, right, hips are set, grab the bar, and then when your shins are touching the bar, pull your shins away from the bar as much as you possibly can, like this. Take a big breath into your stomach as much as you can, and then as your shins descend, pull your chest up and then get your lats tight, and then go for it. So notice that as I'm coming down with my shins, as my shins are pulling down, my chest is pulling up, and then I'm pulling up on the bar, and then I'm able to drive with a pretty consistent position. Now, like I said, this might be relatively useless just because you figured out a way for you to be in a really much better position excuse me, on your pause deadlifts. So whatever you're doing for your pause deadlifts, keep doing for your comp deadlifts. I think it could be as simple as that, but hopefully that setup did help you out. Now, next thing, touch and go bench, and same thing. I think a big part of it has to just do with just establishing a process, rather than like having a million things to think about. Only think about the one or two things that we're doing wrong, just because most of the time it's only really one thing. Especially now that we've been working together for quite a while now. Especially now, it's a situation where you may only really have to focus on doing one thing or two things, and not really focus on a slew of things that you actually might be doing more right than wrong. So, for your touch and go bench, I think what should happen is that you should breathe primarily into your chest. So notice how my chest expands, right? And then so as I breathe primarily into my chest, then I pull my shoulder blades down and reach my chest towards the bar. And then from there, I start my descent as I'm holding my breath. You should be unbelievably uncomfortable right before you start your descent. Now going into it, for touch and go, bar path was a little straight except for the time where you hit the rack. And I think a part of it has to do with how much you're setting up close to the rack. So when you're setting up, going forward, ask yourself, is the bar above my eyesight? So we really want to make sure that the bar is at least 1 inch to 2 inches above your eyesight. It might make the unrack significantly more awkward, but it certainly will allow you to express bar path without hitting the rack. Because I think part of it, either consciously or subconsciously, is you not able to push back hard enough because you're scared you might hit the rack. And I think that is a setup issue and not necessarily a form issue. Now with front squats actually look really solid. I think that as you get down the stretch, your hips start to kick out. And I think that's primarily due to the fact that the elbows aren't actively jamming up anymore. So you do a good job of it in the first couple of reps, but just make sure that as the weights start getting more challenging and as you get more fatigued, especially down the stretch on a current set, really ask yourself, am I going to commit to pulling my elbows up at the bottom of my position on my last 2 reps? Because what you do on your last 2 reps are going to be far more important than what you do on your first rep or 2 reps. Because remember, if you make a mistake on your first or second rep, you always have multiple reps to solve it. But if you make a mistake on your last rep, you will end that whole set thinking that you messed something up. So just keep that in mind in terms of a confidence and sports psychology issue. Pause deadlifts, again, like they were amazing. Like I really did enjoy how much of a difference there was. I thought you did a great job. I thought that the roundedness that occurred in the last rep was more so because you didn't pull the slack out of the bar, but your positioning was really on point. So again, I just want to commend you for that. Now another thing is that Spoto presses, they should be maybe a little bit higher. It looks to me that you're almost touching your chest right over here. I would like it to be like maybe like that. I want to see a greater separation between yourself and the bar. All right. And what I mean by that is maybe like an extra inch higher than you normally set it. Other than that, Jamila, I thought that this week was pretty solid. Congratulations on all of your PRs yet again. And let me know what you think about the deload every 4 weeks type of idea. I normally don't like to systemize my deloads, but I think it might be worth exploring if this is going to be a month-to-month situation. So let me know what you think. Otherwise, I will talk to you soon, and have fun with your travels home. See you.